John Materano.
Mm-hmm.
John was a mobster.
Yeah.
One of the
Part of the Winter Hill Gang.
part of the Winter Hill Gang. Materano was in the back seat of a car, shot Callahan in the back of the head, and stuffed his body in the trunk, and they found the body in the car at MIA. John Connolly sentenced to 40 years in jail.
John Connolly, former FBI agent who's been portrayed in the blockbuster movie Black Mass as a corrupt FBI agent. Was he wrongfully convicted of the state charges of murder? Today we're going to discuss this topic and the case that's before the courts to overturn his conviction with a personal friend, a person who I admire, a leader in South Florida, Jim McDonald. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you.
I am Robert Asencio. Today on Bets and Badges, I have the honor of having my co-host, retired police chief and military historian, David Magnusson. How are you, David?
I'm doing great, and just leading up to it now and having a little discussion with Jim. Incredibly impressive, incredibly interesting. And I sit here as a co-host to you, but I'm excited about learning about this even more so than when I did my initial research. So,
welcome. Let's get right into it.
Good to be here.
Let's get right into it. So how did you get involved in this case? And what's your role with John Connolly?
Well, I got involved. My role is one of his lawyers, along with Craig Frocino, who heads up the Miami Law School Innocence Clinic. So we're co-counsel on this. And I got involved with this case, I want to say it was 2006. I was having a drink in Washington at the Willard Hotel. I know the exact place. The Willard, right across. Whoops.
That's them calling you now.
No, that's not. And I'm with a former colleague from the FBI, my FBI days, Frank Keating, who was a former governor of Oklahoma. Frank and I have known each other for half a century. And Frank was sitting there and he was saying to me, he said, "Jim, it's too bad about John Connolly. He's been charged with murder in Florida." I said, "What? I didn't know anything about that." And he says, "Yeah, he's in jail in Miami." And then Frank proceeded to tell me about people that we mutually knew and I respected, former agents and others in government, who said John really is an innocent guy. He's being wrongfully prosecuted here. And I said to Frank, "Well, he's in Miami. I'll go to say hello to him in jail." I actually knew John when we were both FBI agents in San Francisco. I knew him only in passing. I didn't he wasn't my friend at all. He was more senior to me. But the only thing we had in common, we both went to Jesuit colleges in New England. And I kidded him about my school, Fairfield University, beating Boston College when Bob Cousy had coached his first basketball game. I said, "John, we beat you guys." And that was the only conversation I can remember with him. And the rest is history. I've been working for John ever since.
Well, let's back it up a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about you.
Yeah.
Your background. You were an FBI agent for 3 years. Then you moved on to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
No, I actually moved back to Washington, and I was stationed in first Seattle, then San Francisco, and then moved back to D.C., and I became assistant counsel to the U.S. House Select Committee on Crime, which was chaired by Claude Pepper, a congressman from the Miami area. I was a Connecticut Yankee. I had no connections whatsoever with Florida. I'd never even been here, but I got that job, and it was interesting. But the select committee, being select, they run out of money, and when we ran out of money, I took a job offer to come down to Florida to become special counsel to Governor Ruben Askew, and I became his special counsel on organized crime. So I spent 3 years with Rube, did a bunch of things at the state level, and then decided I need to learn a marketable skill. Namely, I wanted to be a trial lawyer. So I got a job as an assistant U.S. attorney here in Miami, and I tried a lot of cases. And
corruption cases?
All kinds of cases, up both at the trial level and the appellate level. And I was ready to go into private law practice because my family was growing, and I considered myself, having played around in government for almost 10 years, decided it's time to go out there and get a real job. Just before I was to do that, I get a call from the chief counsel of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, who I had gotten to know from other things. And Bob Blakey, his name was Bob Blakey, he was then a professor at Cornell Law School. He asked me, he said, Jim, we need a trial lawyer to help us put on the public hearings for the Kennedy assassination probe. And he asked me to do it, and I thought about it, and I talked to the law firm that I was about to join, and they said, okay, take 6 months, and I did it. So I went back to Washington.
So that's the next interview we're going to bring to you.
Yeah.
The Kennedy assassination.
Well,
but let's go back
let's
to
stick
John
with
Connolly.
John.
What do you
Yeah.
think, David?
Well, listen, I just took off the hat and put on my historian hat. Now you got me going with the JFK thing. But for another day. But listen, the story and what I know of it is almost as intriguing as to what took place here. With the trial and with the case you're handling now.
Let me tell you, the John Connolly thing is a real tragedy. It's a tragedy because an innocent man has spent 20 years in jail for crimes he didn't commit.
Well, let's frame it up. Let's.
Yeah.
So he was an FBI agent, and he retired in 1990. And then in 1999, he gets charged federally
Right.
for racketeering.
Let me tell you what happened. Yes, John retired, decorated career. He retired. He was then he had a job with Boston Edison. I think he was vice president for something or other. The feds in Boston started investigating Whitey Bulger and Stevie Flemi and the Winter Hill Gang. And the U.S. attorney in charge started pushing, and they wanted to indict Bulger and Flemi, who were known criminals in the area.
Hence the movie The Black Mass.
Don't take anything you read in Black Mass as true. Okay. It's total BS. But anyway, so they're going to indict Bulger and Flemi, and they were not using the FBI as investigators for this. As I recall it, again, I wasn't involved in the Boston case, but my understanding is the state police were the investigators. And before they were about to indict Bulger and Flemi, the prosecutors went to the FBI and said, by the way, we're about to indict these guys. Because there was rumors that these guys might have been informants. And the Bureau said, yeah, they were our informants. And we're
talking about Bulger and Flemi.
Okay. And the deal was, when you're an informant, you're allowed to commit some crimes to keep your cover, but they were not allowed to do murder. And again, I wasn't involved in this case, but my understanding is, so they go to John Connolly, a former agent at that time, who was Bulger and Flemi's handler as the FBI agent. And they go to John and say, John, they basically said, John, we want you to say that they were not informants because they want to be able to indict these guys. And Connolly said, no, they were informants. And that's the deal we made with these guys. And he would not basically lie to help the feds out, indict these guys. He said, the federal government, made a deal with these guys. They became our informants. And traditional with any informant, you tell them, you commit any crime, especially murder, you've got no immunity. So they went after John because John refused to play ball with the feds. They wanted John basically to lie.
So 1999, the first arrest comes about, the first indictment comes about, which is the racketeering at the federal level.
Right.
There were a couple of the charges that were brought along.
Yep.
Then subsequently, John is sentenced to a 10-year prison stint federally, and he served 6 years. But I believe it was 2008, between 2006 and 2008, there's a state indictment in Florida for the John Callahan murder of the former owner of High Life.
Which also was a subject of the federal prosecution, and he was acquitted of it there.
Okay.
John was convicted of what I would call minor.
I'll caution you on banging the table.
Oh, sorry. John was acquitted of the Callahan murder that was part of the federal prosecution. They got him on sending some letter to a judge. I can't remember it because I wasn't involved, but they got him on relatively minor stuff, 10 years in jail. So then they go and indict him down here for the same Callahan killing. And that's where I come in.
Okay.
For the local audience, though, that killing was the one where he was in the trunk of the car at the airport, correct? Right? 82, 81, right around there?
Yes.
The body of ex-World Highlight President John Callahan was found in a parking lot at Miami International Airport, less than 50 yards away from the Metro-Dade Airport Police Station. His badly decomposed body was found stuffed inside the trunk of his car. He was shot 5 times in the head and body. Police say Callahan had been dead for at least 3 days, and his death appears to be at the hands of a professional killer.
He was shot by a gentleman by the name, and I use that term loosely, John Maturano.
Mhm.
John was a mobster, one of the
Part of the Winter Hill Gang.
part of the Winter Hill gang. John killed Callahan, shot him. He was in the back. Maturano was in the back seat of a car, shot Callahan in the back of the head, and stuffed his body in a trunk, and they found the body in the car at MIA. At the time of the killing, John was, I think he was on Cape Cod, probably on a weekend, nowhere near it. So they indicted John down here, and the key witnesses against John were John Maturano, Stevie Flemi, Kevin Weeks. These are all Winter Hill Gangs members. Among them, they have roughly 42 murders. John Morris, a corrupt FBI agent, the corrupt FBI agent.
Yeah, who happened to be John Connolly's supervisor. Am I right?
Who was granted immunity.
Yeah.
So in the case down here, John was convicted by the evidence they had was the testimony of these various people. John Maturano, free man today, he made a deal. Kevin Weeks, out of jail. Stevie Flemi was out of jail. I think they put him back in on something else. John Morris, never prosecuted, living his life wherever he is, in hiding. John Connolly, sentenced to 40 years in jail.
So John Connolly gets released from federal prison. He is immediately remanded to the custody of the state of Florida.
Yeah.
And he's sent to Florida prison for 40 years.
Right.
For the John Callahan's murder, the former owner of Highlight.
Yeah.
And the way the story is told is that John Connolly, who was the FBI agent, FBI handler of Bulger and these guys, then tells Bulger that John Callahan is going to testify to the government that they're involved, right?
Right. That the government was trying to flip Callahan to be an informant.
Exactly.
And the allegation is that Connolly tipped off Bulger about this. John, of course, denies it. He said at the time when all of this was going down, he was a student at Harvard Kennedy School getting his master's in public administration. The supervisor of the ASAC, Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Boston office, who was running the Callahan effort to flip him, a guy named Bob Fitzpatrick, we learned after John's trial, well after his trial, that he had called or informed the prosecutors, the Miami and the federal prosecutor, that John had nothing to do with the Callahan investigation, that Bob Fitzpatrick, kept all of that close to the vest, that John was at Harvard and he wasn't involved in the case. But that was kept from us. We did not know that because Bob Fitzpatrick, who John did not have a good relationship with, I mean, Fitzpatrick was sort of I don't know what kind of guy he was at the time, but John really wasn't his buddy or anything. And I remember during the lead up to the Miami trial that Fitzpatrick was, I think, the number one witness, and then the government took his name off the list. And they took his name off the list exactly around the time when Fitzpatrick told the government, hey, Connolly was not involved in the Callahan case. And Fitzpatrick talked to the government investigator, who then wrote an email to both Michael Von Zamp, the local prosecutor, and the former federal prosecutor, and said he talked with Fitzpatrick, and Fitzpatrick said, in essence, Connolly had nothing to do with the Callahan killing. He wrote that back, I want to say the email was written in 2006, before the trial. That's called Brady material, exculpatory information. You would have thought, had the prosecutors been following the rules of ethics, we would have seen that before the trial. Never heard of it until well into the 20 teens. I forget the exact date. We were moving for a new trial well, to back it up, we learned from Fitzpatrick, one of our investigators found him after the trial, and Fitzpatrick told us that he told the government that John was not involved, et cetera. And he did an affidavit for us. But by this time, Fitzpatrick had cancer. He had some kind of illness. And we never could get him. By the time we went to take his deposition, he was ill and he died. But what is interesting, another little aspect that nobody really talks about with Fitzpatrick is the government now knew that Fitz was a key witness, the ASAC running the investigation. Well, let me jump. John was acquitted of in the Florida case. He was charged with murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and then a throwaway second-degree murder. He was acquitted of conspiracy and first-degree murder. Acquitted.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that in a second. But let's get to, for the audience, because you know the case very well, and we're just learning more about it. But there's a lot of pieces. So for the audience to be able to keep track of the time sequence, so John Connolly goes to state prison, 2008. Then appeals are filed. Yep. Right. Goes up to the appellate court, right? Is it the third DCA?
Third DCA.
And then what happens at the third DCA?
Okay, well, we appeal the conviction, third DCA.
And the conviction was based on what? I'm sorry.
On the second-degree murder.
Okay.
And enhanced with the use of a firearm. He was acquitted of the major charges.
So the third DCA acquits him?
No. The third DCA affirmed the conviction, first time, affirmed. With what's called a per curiam affirm, per PCA, which means the appellate court issues a one-liner, affirmed. That's it. No decision, nothing, just affirmed. And we said, as lawyers said, basically that's BS. You can't just affirm something like this on a complicated case like this. So we went back to the third district and said, would you please write an opinion? And they did. They wrote an opinion. And guess what they did? They threw out the conviction. They reversed it. They reversed the conviction, threw it out. So the state of Florida, the state attorney's office, being aggressive that they are, they went back to the court and asked for en banc, which means the entire third district court of appeal would hear this case. And they did. We briefed it, we had argument, and the third DCA wrote an opinion reversing the reversal. By, I believe it was one vote. It's like 6-5 or whatever. I can't remember. And the opinion to me is incomprehensible, makes no sense. It ignored standing Florida law. It was written by a judge who was a former state attorney, who is known as a very aggressive prosecutor type, even as a judge. And she wrote an opinion which it only applies here in the third district. Was
that Leslie Rothenberg?
That's who it was. And if you read that opinion today, it's still incomprehensible. I don't think any other circuit has ever followed it, nor should they, because the Florida law, as handed down by the Florida Supreme Court, says to enhance any conviction by the use of a firearm, it's got to be the firearm used in the commission of the felony. Does sort of make sense. The third district managed, through Judge Rothenberg, to basically come out with an opinion that looks like a pretzel, but because John was nowhere near the killing when Callahan was shot. John was in Boston or Massachusetts, and the state's argument was, well, he had to have a weapon on him because he was an FBI agent, not the weapon used. So that's the rationale of the third district court of appeal, that because he had a weapon on him, and I don't remember what the evidence is at this point, but there was no direct evidence. It just somebody said, well, if he's an agent, he's probably wearing his weapon. That's had to be
speculative at best,
totally
right?
speculative.
Right. Yeah.
But that third district bought it, and it was a close decision. But Judge Rothenberg got the vote she needed to say that because he should have been carrying it when he was an agent. Therefore, that's somehow relates to enhancing this conviction. And that's why they wanted it. They wanted the 40-year conviction, because if they couldn't do it that way, the whole statute of limitations would have thrown the case out. Yeah. So anyway, that's how John's conviction that was reversed was reinstated. And we tried to get that to the Florida Supreme Court. They wouldn't take it, which didn't surprise me because it's an outlier opinion, this one in the 3rd District, not being held by any other district, because this case, it's the Rodriguez case. That's the one the Florida Supremes have said, got to be the weapon used in the commission of the felony to enhance the penalty. So now we're in federal court on a habeas, and we'll see where that goes. But with John, it's an uphill fight, because you see what we're dealing with now is, if you look at the opinion of the 3rd District and Bank, the judge who wrote the opinion has page after page of a summary, her summary of the facts. No citations to record, anything. It just reads on. It's somebody writing her overview, and there are things in it. For example, one comes to mind. The evidence against Connolly was overwhelming. Oh, really? Overwhelming? Conspiracy acquitted? First degree acquitted? Oh, no. That's not overwhelming to me. And then that overwhelming thing gets picked up by the next judge that comes along. Oh, overwhelming facts. Yeah, and that's what happens in the legal process. It's not perfect. But anyway, so that's... So I lost my train of thought. I had something I was going to say.
That's good. We'll pause right there.
Yeah.
David, what are your thoughts leading up to so far what we've been told? We've been given an overview. We've given a status of where the case is in the mid-2000s.
Well, I mean, right now, speaking for the viewers and taking it all in, I mean, where does this go now? We know he's not in prison right now, right?
Well, in 2021, he was released from prison because he on medical.
Oh, yeah. John is 84 years old now. Mm-hmm. He's had serious cancer. It's sort of in remission, I think, but, he constantly goes to doctors. I mean, with what he's had, if he were to go back to prison, he wouldn't last 6 months.
As a matter of fact, his release is dependent on or contingent on his medical condition.
Right, and his medical condition. Then improve at this stage of his life, and with the various medical problems he has, the word improvement, it doesn't really fit. With this cancer, with he's got other ailments, and it all sort of,
Yeah, I was reading some documents specifically about his release or his condition, and the fears that given that prisons are close confinement with many people, COVID era, and his immune system is debilitated, that if he goes back to prison, it's basically a sentence to die.
It is. It's completely. And the reason the medical facility he almost died when they transferred him up to North Florida for medical purposes before they let him out. And once he got out, we got him with some superb medical care at University of Miami Med School, and then ended up going up to Boston at Boston General, where he's had really excellent care.
Which is where he's living. He's living up in Boston. In Massachusetts.
In Massachusetts, yeah.
So let's talk about the basis of this effort to to throw out his conviction, which is based on the firearm, right? That the argument is that he did not have a firearm with him, so therefore the statute of limitations had run.
That's not part of it right now. Well, there have been so many issues. The main issue that we've been dealing with in the past few years is the fact that the state failed to turn over this Brady material, the exculpatory information that Bob Fitzpatrick, the former FBI supervisor, told the government before the trial, and they kept it from us. And we only found out about it, I forget, it was 2018, when the only thing we were going on was the affidavit of Bob Fitzpatrick, who said, look, this is what I told the government. And the government, the state attorney, produced this email trying to disprove another point about, I forget exactly, but they handed this email. And we almost fell off of our chairs when we saw it. It was dated 06 before the trial. Our position has been, we continue to advocate, considering, see, we didn't call Fitzpatrick because the government took him off the list. We didn't know anything he was going to say. So we didn't, they took him off the list toward, as I recall it, just before the trial. So there was no reason for the defense lawyers to go out and take a deposition of somebody that wasn't going to be called. We had no idea what he would say. And from John's perspective, there's no need to take his depo. Had we known, had this email been produced to us where Bob Fitzpatrick said Connolly was not involved in the Callahan case, John's lawyers would have been on a plane up to New England to take that guy's deposition in a heartbeat. And if the case against John was so, quote, overwhelming as the third district likes to, or that judge likes to, former judge likes to write, if a jury had heard from the supervisor of the FBI squad trying to flip Callahan saying, Connolly didn't have anything to do with this. He was over at Harvard getting his master's. I would say the jury, more likely than not, would have just thrown the whole case out. They threw the major case out. They just left something, a little few crumbs for the prosecutors. Had they, that FBI supervisor, the assistant special agent charged, saying, John didn't have anything to do with this case. I kept it close to the vest. Morris knew about it. Morris, the corrupt agent, knew about it. The likelihood would have been John would have been acquitted completely. He was acquitted in Boston. The case was so weak. As I said, the only evidence they have of John Connolly's corruption is out of the mouths of convicted killers. That's it. Whitey Bulger, when he was arrested in 2011, gave some 302s. You know what 302? It's an interview. You know what they are. And I have a couple of them here, and we're trying to get the rest of them. They've redacted a whole bunch. But one of the things that Whitey said to his arresting FBI agents is Connolly was framed. This was before, we didn't even know about it. We heard about it later. Whitey Bulger, this story, Black Mass and all that, of John and Whitey growing up in Southie, good friends, that's another BS.
Well, it is documented that they grew up. John's, for the first 12 years of his life, he lived at the Old Harbor housing community.
The difference, the issue is, not the issue, but Whitey Bulger was 10 years older than John. So they were not in the same generation.
Oh, the way the story goes is that John was friends with
Bill Bulger.
James Bulger's brother. Bill.
No. Yes. Bill, that's absolutely.
Known as Billy.
Billy Bulger.
Who became the Senate president
and then
of the
ultimately
state.
president of the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Yes, John was very good, was friends with Bill Bulger, knew them all. Whitey, it's hard to believe that you could have two brothers coming out of the same Irish Catholic family, one being a mobster and one being a brilliant Renaissance man, politician, president of the Senate, ultimately president of the university. It's hard to get your own.
It's also hard to believe that there was no knowledge that they both were not very well connected in what the others were doing, right? What each one of the other were doing.
Well, I can't speculate. All I can tell you is that Connolly was not buddies with Bulger, Whitey. He handled them. Obviously, he's from Southie. He knew Bill. Though, as my understanding, the family has nothing. Whitey had nothing to do with the family. I mean, they were just completely separate. So the story is nice. The Black Mass story, the Departed, all this stuff about John but they were not friends. They didn't grow up in this 10 years apart. That just doesn't happen. They're not. So that's just part of the myth up there about John. I can only tell you from all the years I've been working for John, his story has been consistent. I know the guy, and he didn't do it. He just didn't do it, as the jury in Boston said, and as our guys down here said, the jury.
I think the issue that remains is maybe he wasn't present for the murder, but did he pass on the information that got John Callahan killed? David, your thoughts?
Well, I go back a little bit here, with Bulger's brother, the older brother. And this isn't to insinuate any sort of guilt or anything here, but knowing the family as he did, should he have been the one to be the handler for Whitey with the connection he might have had to the brother? I mean, is there a conflict of interest there? And if there is, does that sort of send you down a road that, may or may not lead to other things?
Well, the answer is I can't answer that at this stage of the game. If that was we're out of time.
No, please. We got
okay.
about 2 minutes.
Oh, okay. I can't answer that. That's that. Again, if it's Bureau decided John Connolly be the handler for Bulger and Flemi because you're from Southie, he's from Southie. Okay, there's that really. But you have to know John. Was he corrupt? Did he take money? The answer is no. Never took his nickel. John Morris, and I'll tell you why he never took a nickel. Because if he did, he's smarter than all of us. Because in the federal case in Boston, they couldn't find a thing.
Yeah.
Couldn't find, because he didn't take any money.
And John Morris took a $5,000, $7,000.
John Morris took probably $70,000 or more.
Okay.
Lots of money, according to Bulger himself. He said somebody asked Bulger, it's in the 302, did you pay Morris $7,000? And Bulger's, yeah, but Whitey said, add a couple of zeros to that at least. So here's the last thing I'll say about this whole thing about the immunity thing, which started this whole thing. Connolly, people like to say, well, John Connolly protected them, guaranteed them immunity. Bulger, Flemi. Okay. Doesn't work that way. Street agent doesn't have the power to grant someone prosecutorial immunity.
So as we close the show,
Yeah.
David, your last thoughts?
I mean, Jim, you got your work cut out for you. I mean, it's you're up against a lot of doors that aren't opening right now.
Sure.
But very soon, there may be one that does open. Hopefully, with enough time left.
Yeah.
It's a race against the clock, right?
Yeah, I don't think of it that way because John is sort of indestructible. He's a tough guy. But I'm doing this, and we'll continue it with the Innocence Project because as a former prosecutor and a former law enforcement officer, it really offends me to see what I think is a prosecutorial misconduct, over aggressive prosecution. When an innocent man has been subjected to this for 20 years in prison for something he didn't commit. And I'm sorry, show me the evidence that he committed, and they can't.
Yeah. And in an era, which is my closing statement here, is that in an era of polarization and this public disconfidence, if you will, right, with federal agencies, how does this occur? Of course, we'll have to discuss that at another time, where an innocent person gets convicted. Happens all the time, but we'll love to discuss that more in depth in the next visit.
It all depends. The system depends on the people in it. And in this particular case, we know the state prosecutor and we know the federal prosecutor were very aggressive. And I'm not sure, all I can say is that it's, from my perspective, this is a miscarriage.
This has been another show of Bets and Badges to Miami's Community News. Michael Miller, Grant Miller, the Community News team, and our producer behind the scene, Rachel Brummage. We can't thank you enough to you, the audience. Drop us a line. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about, what you thought of the show. You can find us on all podcast platforms under Bets and Badges, at Bets and Badges, or betsandbadges.com. If you don't get it, it's Bets and Badges. Love to speak with you. Thank you. See you next time.